Let's be honest, Miss Kellerthy's claims seem exaggerated. That sentence hit harder than it should have. I was sitting in a sleek, glass-walled conference room on the 4-3 Rudd floor of the Halden and Price building, across from 3 people in tailored suits, one of whom hadn't stopped smirking since I walked in. This was my 73rd interview in 9 months. I was running on borrowed hope and half a tank of gas. And now, after 5 years of leading market expansion across 5 continents, I was being told again that my experience didn't add up. The head of talent, Marjorie Lattimore, leaned forward with her folded hands. Her tone was syrupy and sharp all at once. A lot of candidates pad their resumes. You understand why we have to ask tough questions. I held her gaze. Every bullet point is backed by data and outcomes. You're welcome to verify them all. WWW. Marjorie tilted her head like she was considering a dog for adoption. Before I could speak again, the door to the conference room swung open. A man in a charcoal suit stepped in, checking his phone, clearly not expecting company until he looked up. He froze. Then his eyes widened. Sabrina? He blinked. Elias Monroe, CEO of one of the largest consumer goods conglomerates in the U.S. His face broke into a huge smile. You're the reason we survived Q4 last year. Your strategy didn't just save our Asia division, it rebuilt our entire roadmap. Are you joining Halden and Price? Marjorie's face went pale. This is a preliminary conversation. We haven't made any decisions yet. Elias turned to her, expression unreadable. Well, if she's joining you, lock it in now. I was just telling our board we need to triple our contract, but only if she's on the team. The room was dead silent. And just like that, I was no longer overqualified. I was a deal closer. A miracle worker. But the sting hadn't faded. Because a minute earlier, I'd been dismissed. I forced a polite smile as Marjorie scrambled to take credit for identifying exceptional talent. My stomach churned. How many others never got that door to swing open? How many brilliant people got written off because no one powerful stepped in at the right moment? If you've ever been underestimated, if someone decided your worth before you even opened your mouth, drop a heartbroken icon in the comments. You're not alone. And this story is for you. Because what happened next didn't just change my career. It shook an entire system. And it's only just beginning. They saw the resume, the credentials, the global campaigns, the boardroom photos with executives in Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo. But they didn't see the overtime at a small-town diner in Ohio where I washed dishes at midnight after closing to pay for community college. They didn't see the second-hand textbooks I highlighted until the ink bled through the pages. Or the fact that, at 20, I sold my car to afford my final semester at business school. To them, I was polished, overqualified, or worse, unrelatable. But the truth? My whole life had been a series of closed doors I had to pry open, sometimes with nothing but my bare hands and a crowbar made of sheer will. I was the first person in my family to finish college. The first woman in my rural county to intern at a multinational firm. I still remember the look on my high school guidance counselor's face when I told her I wanted to study international economics. She blinked twice and said, maybe something more practical? I did it anyway. And not out of rebellion but survival. I'd spent too many years watching brilliant women in my town settle for less because someone told them they weren't built for more. After earning my MBA, I climbed faster than anyone expected. I built a name in global market strategy, became known for identifying overlooked segments and scaling into complex regions where others saw risk. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but I was the one who came in after a collapse and quietly turned numbers into lifelines. By the time I was 40, I was Executive Strategy Director at CrestEdge, overseeing teams across 5 continents. My job wasn't flashy. I didn't post about it on LinkedIn. But I was the one people called when stakes were high and expectations were low. Still, for every deal I closed and every market I unlocked, there was always that flicker in someone's eyes, the unspoken question, How did she get here? As if my success must be an exception, an accident, a quota. They couldn't imagine the path that led me to those conference rooms because they'd never walked it. They didn't know what it felt like to hear, "You don't fit the mold," and smile anyway. Or to nod politely when your male counterpart gets the handshake and you're asked to take notes. I endured it all. What I didn't expect, what still bruises when I look back, was how quickly it could all be erased. When CrestEdge was acquired by the venture group, I didn't panic. My numbers were rock solid. My relationships with clients were deep. I thought I was safe. But within 6 weeks, all 5 senior female directors were replaced quietly, efficiently, strategically. Not fired, of course. Restructured. New direction. Different leadership chemistry. One by one, we were called into glass offices and handed severance letters padded with NDA clauses and careful smiles. Mine came on a Tuesday. "Your track record is excellent," the new CEO said without looking up from his phone. "But we're building a new energy for the firm. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal. As if erasing a decade of leadership could be done with a single sentence without even making eye contact. I walked out that day not just unemployed, but uninvited. Not just from a company, but from a system that had quietly decided I no longer fit inside the box they were building. And yet somewhere deep inside, I wasn't broken. I was sharpening. They had no idea what was coming next. The memo came on a Friday. Subject: organizational realignment. It was laced with the kind of corporate language that sounds almost poetic if you don't know what it means. Words like streamlining, vision shift, strategic synergy, all carefully curated to distract from the truth. Heads were going to roll. Still, I wasn't concerned. My division had just posted its 3rd consecutive quarter of outperforming projections. Our Southeast Asia strategy was being cited at industry panels. My inbox was full of client referrals and thank you notes. I had numbers. And in corporate, numbers are supposed to protect you. But Monday came, and with it, a calendar invite. Quick check-in with Preston. No subject. No agenda. Just a time. Preston Hartley, the new CEO. He'd only been there 3 months, but the mood inside CrestEdge had already shifted. The energy felt tighter, leaner, less human. His nickname in the industry was the Scissorhand, not for budget cuts, but for how swiftly he trimmed people out of the picture when they didn't fit his style. I walked into his corner office at 9:00 sharp. He didn't stand to greet me, just gestured toward the chair like he was asking someone to sit in a waiting room. "Sabrina," he began, still scrolling through something on his phone. "I want to start by saying I've reviewed your track record. It's stellar." There was a pause, a half smile, a glance up. "But we're moving toward a different kind of leadership energy. One that aligns more dynamically with the firm's future." And our 5, that word again, energy. I stayed still, expression unreadable. "You'll have my formal decision by HR this afternoon. Of course, you'll be offered a generous transition package. We value your contributions deeply." Translation: we're pushing you out, and we're paying you to leave quietly. I didn't cry. Didn't ask why. Didn't beg. I nodded once, stood, and walked out. But my hands didn't stop shaking until I reached the parking garage. By Wednesday, I knew it wasn't just me. 4 other womenal senior directors had been restructured within 6 weeks. Each one replaced by someone with a looser resume and a tighter connection to Preston's network. They called it a rebrand. I called it erasure. And yet, if you read the press release that month, you would have thought the firm had just discovered fire. A bold new direction rooted in innovation and decisive leadership. They weren't reinventing the wheel. They were recycling the same mold: loud, sharp suits, Harvard Golf Club handshakes, and a stunning ability to make exclusion sound like strategy. The hardest part wasn't leaving the company. It was leaving the silence. No one talked about what was happening, not publicly. The women let go, simply disappeared. Their achievements, their impact, their years of building trust, it all vanished into polished PR and boardroom applause. And the ones who stayed? They kept their heads down, pretended not to notice the change in tone during meetings, the new rules, the sudden lack of eye contact. But I noticed. I noticed everything. Because when you've spent your entire life climbing into a space not built for you, you learn to spot the signs before the floor gives way. And this wasn't just about me. This was about what happened when a system decided that brilliance without bravado didn't belong. That empathy wasn't a leadership quality. That data-driven insight meant nothing if it didn't come in the right package. I didn't know it then, but that quiet dismissal was the beginning of something bigger. Something louder. Something they would never see coming. The alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m., and for a full 30 seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. Interview number 73. I wasn't counting to be dramatic. I was counting to stay grounded. To remind myself that this wasn't in my head. That I had shown up, again and again, in rooms where my resume spoke volumes, and still wasn't loud enough. I slid out of bed, made coffee I barely tasted, and pulled on my one remaining lucky blazer. Not because I believed in luck anymore, but because routine gave me something to hold on to. This time, the interview was with Halden & Price, a boutique consulting firm based in Chicago. Mid-sized. Slick branding. A reputation for modernizing talent pipelines. Whatever that meant. I arrived 10 minutes early, rehearsed nothing, and sat with my hands folded in the lobby like I had at least 50 other times that year. The receptionist smiled politely but didn't offer water. Small detail. But you start to notice them all when you're exhausted. When the recruiting coordinator came out to greet me, she looked surprised. Not in a rude way, just the kind of quick assessment people do when their assumptions don't match the face in front of them. "Oh, hi. You're Ms. Keller?" I smiled. "That's me." She blinked, then recovered. "Right this way." They'd booked a small conference room with wide windows and sterile chairs. Across the table sat Marjorie Lattimore, head of talent acquisition. Her glasses were immaculate. Her tone, clinical. After introductions, we moved swiftly into the questioning. "Tell us about your time at CrestEdge. What exactly was your role in Southeast Asia strategy? Were you personally leading those accounts?" I answered every question clearly, concisely, with metrics to back up every claim. I'd done this dance enough times to know when someone was listening and when they were simply waiting for their turn to dismiss you. Marjorie, it turned out, was the latter. She flipped through my resume like it was a puzzle missing pieces. "I see a lot of movement in recent years," she said, her pen tapping on the paper. "And some unusually large accounts for a single strategist." I nodded. "That's because I led multinational expansion for 3 product lines simultaneously. It was part of a consolidated growth initiative." She gave a small, polite smile. "That's a significant claim." The implication hung in the air. "You sure you didn't make this up?" My hands were still, but inside, the familiar ache was rising tight across the chest, burning behind the ribs. Not rage, not sadness, just fatigue. Bone-deep, soul-heavy fatigue. Because I knew how this ended. Another polite rejection email. Another carefully worded, "We've chosen to move in a different direction." Another walk home, rehearsing all the ways I could have said things differently, even though I'd said everything right. I stared out the window behind Marjorie as she spoke something about internal calibration and cultural fit. My eyes found the skyline beyond the glass, and for a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to stop trying to fit altogether. To build something new, where no one had to shrink themselves to be seen. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was already in motion. Because, within minutes, that interview, the one I thought would be like all the rest, was about to go off script. Completely. And when it did, it wouldn't just change the conversation. It would change everything. The email came the next morning at 7:12 a.m. "We were impressed by your conversation with our executive team. We'd like to formally extend an offer." Attached was a PDF titled Senior Director, Strategic Growth. The salary was generous. significantly higher than what had been discussed during the interview. A signing bonus, equity options, relocation assistance, if needed. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like a bruise being covered with glitter. I sat at my kitchen table in the soft light of an overcast morning, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The numbers were right. The compensation would wipe out the slow-bleeding debt I'd carried since CrestEdge pushed me out. It would let me breathe again financially, at least. But every line of that offer screamed something else entirely. You weren't enough. Until someone else said you were. I replayed the moment in that conference room, over and over again. The look on Marjorie's face when Elias Monroe had walked in and recognized me had, thanked me publicly, had told her to lock it in. The speed with which her demeanor had shifted from distant skepticism to forced admiration, as if her entire perception of me had turned on a dime, because someone more powerful had spoken. Suddenly, I was strategic, valuable, visionary. But just 10 minutes before that, I'd been a resume to be scrutinized, a box to be doubted. That wasn't validation. That was performative approval. The truth gnawed at me as I scrolled through the contract. If Elias hadn't walked through that door, would they have ever followed up? Would this same woman have typed this email had no one vouched for me in real time? I already knew the answer. The offer didn't reflect my worth. It reflected their fear of losing something valuable once someone else labeled it that way. And the more I stared at the document, the more it began to feel hollow. I thought about the dozens, maybe hundreds of women like me who had walked into rooms just like that one, who hadn't been lucky enough for a client to interrupt the narrative, who had been brilliant, but never had their brilliance echoed by a powerful man. I thought about all the closed doors, the smirks, the cultural fit excuses. I thought about what it meant to say yes to a place that had only changed its mind when it became convenient. And a quiet question formed in the back of my mind. What if I built something where no one needed to be validated to be seen? It was just a whisper, a flicker of thought, but it was louder than the numbers on the page. That weekend, I didn't celebrate. I didn't call my parents. I didn't even reply. Instead, I stared at that offer letter until it blurred. Because deep down, I knew the answer wasn't in what they were offering. It was in what I was willing to accept. And I was done begging for entry. Done explaining. Done shrinking. What came next wouldn't be about fitting into their mold. It would be about breaking it entirely. It started with a cup of coffee and a half-joking question. That Sunday morning, I met Nadia Bennett, former data intelligence partner at CrestEdge, our usual cafe on North Franklin. We'd been doing monthly check-ins since the layoff. We never said it aloud, but I think we both needed to feel seen by at least one person who still remembered what we were capable of. She slid into the booth with a grin and a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. I've got a wild idea, she said, unzipping her coat. Promise you won't laugh. I didn't laugh, because something in her voice told me this wasn't just small talk. I've been consulting with a few clients lately, she continued. All former Crest accounts. And they're all saying the same thing. Why isn't there a firm that combines cultural context with analytics? Big firms crunch numbers, but they don't understand people. I nodded slowly, that flicker from earlier in the week reigniting in my chest. They want insight that actually connects to the markets they're entering, Nadia said. Not just Western templates slapped onto unfamiliar regions. And you're thinking, I said carefully, we could build that? She didn't blink. I'm thinking we already have that. You, me, maybe Jules. Jules Kimore, former digital transformation lead. Another casualty of the restructuring. Strategic, brilliant, and perpetually underestimated. I let the idea sit there. The rational part of my brain fired off alarms. You're not ready. You don't have funding. What if it fails? But another voice, quieter, calmer, rose up to meet them. What if this is the thing you've been preparing for all along? I reached into my bag and slid across the offer letter from Halden and Price. Nadia scanned it quickly, eyebrows raised. Damn. Impressive. But, she added, reading my face. But it's not real, I said. Not the way I need it to be. They only wanted me after someone vouched for me, not because they saw me. She folded the letter and handed it back. So, we stopped waiting to be seen. We spent the next 3 hours sketching a vision on napkins and crumpled receipts. A firm that would rethink how companies entered emerging markets. One that didn't just map data but respected context, nuance, and culture. One that valued ideas over titles, lived experience over pedigrees. We named it Prism because we wanted to take everything the big firms filtered into one narrow beam and refract it. By Monday morning, I had declined Holden and Price's offer. They responded within minutes. This is disappointing. Is there anything we can do to change your mind? I wrote back. It's not about the money. It never was. It was about voice. About agency. About building something that would never require someone like me to justify her existence again. We incorporated Prism strategies with 3 laptops, 2 severance packages, and a hell of a lot of conviction. No office. No investors. No glossy website. Just 3 women who'd been cut out of the old system, deciding to write a new one. And what we lacked in capital, we made up for in clarity. Because this time, we weren't asking for a seat at anyone's table. We were building our own. The first 2 weeks felt like building a skyscraper with toothpicks. We worked out of Nadia's converted garage, where the heater sputtered and the Wi-Fi barely held a Zoom call. Our desks were old folding tables. The whiteboard we used had water damage in the corner and ghosted scribbles from someone else's long-abandoned dream. But it was ours. And somehow, that made it sacred. Every morning started with strong coffee, quick updates, and a shared glance that said, "Is this crazy?" Every night ended later than it should have possibly. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't falling asleep dreading the next day. We didn't have clients yet. But we had ideas, real ones. Systems. Frameworks. Case studies from our past work that we knew had value. We spent days refining our core offering, rehearsing how to explain it in 1 sentence, 1 paragraph, 1 deck. Still, dreams don't pay rent. And reality was looming closer with each passing week. Then, on a rainy Thursday morning, it happened. I got an email from Damon Reeves, a mid-level director at a consumer electronics firm. He'd attended one of my strategy workshops years ago, back when I was still at Crest Edge. The message was short. Heard you launched something new. Are you taking small projects? I have a team pushing for Southeast Asia expansion, but our consultants say the markets aren't viable. Thought of you. My heart jumped. I reread the message twice before forwarding it to Nadia and Jules with only 2 words. This is it. We met Damon the next day over video. He looked tired. His team had been pushing for months to move into emerging regions, but leadership kept hearing the same thing from their big-name consultants. Too complex, too high, risk, too early. But Damon remembered something I'd said in that old workshop about how risk is often misread when you're viewing it through the wrong lens. We just want a second opinion, he said. Nothing too big, small budget. Can you look into it? We'd be happy to, I replied. Calm, professional. Inside, I was already mapping every market condition from memory. Over the next 3 weeks, we worked nonstop. We studied local consumer behavior, political trends, regional logistics, and digital access. We cross-referenced cultural engagement with product adaptation timelines. We built something no algorithm could have spit out because it required context, empathy, and time. The day we presented our findings to Damon's leadership team, the virtual room felt stiff at first, corporate poker faces and muted cameras. But slide by slide, you could feel the temperature change. By the end, not only were the cameras on, executives who weren't even scheduled to attend were asking follow-up questions. One VP said, "You just put numbers to something we've been trying to articulate for 6 months." When the call ended, I sat back in my chair and looked at Nadia and Jules in the tiny Brady Bunch-style video boxes. We didn't say anything. We just smiled. It wasn't a huge contract. It didn't make us rich. But it made us real. A week later, Damon called again. I passed your report to another team here. They'd like to talk. Also, a friend at another firm might be reaching out. I hope that's okay. I smiled into the phone. It was more than okay. It was the first crack in the wall. And once a wall cracks, it doesn't stay up for long. By month 4, Prism had moved out of Nadia's garage and into a small co-working suite on the 9th floor of a building with flickering hallway lights and questionable elevators. But to us, it felt like a skyscraper. We had a whiteboard that didn't ghost, desks that didn't wobble, clients that paid invoices on time. But more than that, we had momentum. One client led to another. Word was spreading quietly, under the radar through networks that valued results more than branding. It was early traction. Nothing viral. Nothing flashy. But it was enough to keep going. Then came the invitation. The Global Market Innovation Summit. 3 days. Thousands of attendees. The biggest firms in consulting, tech, and investment would be there. It was the kind of conference that used to ignore people like us, startups with no pedigree, no VC backing, no buzzwords. But Jules, ever the connector, had once co-chaired a tech panel at the summit. She made a few calls, pulled a few strings, and somehow we landed a spot on the secondary stage. 20 minutes. Just after lunch. No press, no guarantees. Still, it was a stage. Our topic was simple. Invisible markets. What traditional metrics miss. We weren't trying to be provocative. We just told the truth. We shared 3 case studies, all from our early clients. We broke down exactly how legacy models designed decades ago in Western boardrooms consistently overlooked nuanced, high-growth potential in regions deemed too risky. We showed the data, the cultural context, the outcomes. At first, the room was still, curious, but cautious. Then, at the end of our Q&A, a voice rose from the back. "Excuse me, how confident are you in these projections?" We turned toward the speaker. Elias Monroe, the same Elias who had unknowingly salvaged my interview months earlier. He stood, holding our printed report in his hand like he'd been studying it for days. "Our models," I said carefully, "have outperformed standard forecasts by 2.3 to 4.1% in the last 2 quarters. We've verified those numbers with independent auditors." Elias nodded. "Good. Because your strategy saved my company last year. I recommended you to Halden and Price. But I heard you're not with them." The room fell quiet. I felt the tension settle over the air like fog. I met his gaze and replied calmly. I chose to pursue a different path. There was a pause. Then, Elias turned to the audience. "If your firm isn't watching Prism strategies yet, you're already behind." That moment changed everything. Within hours, people who'd skipped our session were requesting private briefings. A small circle formed around us at the networking reception. Invitations. Media requests. Warm intros from people we hadn't even met. And from across the room, I saw her. Marjorie Latimore, head of talent at Halden and Price. The same woman who had doubted every line of my resume. She stood beside their CEO, whispering something, eyes locked on me. Then Elias crossed the room toward me again. This time, with purpose. "Sabrina," he said, loud enough for the nearby conversations to pause, "we want to transition all of our Apex market strategy to your firm. Your models are more accurate. Your insight is more human. We're done with the traditional firms." I heard Marjorie's breath catch. I smiled, professional but certain. We'd be honored to discuss the opportunity. Elias leaned in. "Also expect calls. I've mentioned Prism to a few colleagues." End quote. And just like that, the walls they built to keep us out started shaking from the inside. If you've ever been dismissive to later prove your worth in public, drop a fire icon in the comments. Some walls don't need to be climbed, they need to be cracked wide open. 3 weeks after the summit, our inboxes were overflowing. Partnership inquiries, speaking invitations, client referrals, and one press mention that labeled us the most quietly disruptive voice in global strategy. Debut. It should have felt like a victory. And in many ways it did. But the higher you rise, the more closely you're watched. And not always by admirers. It started subtly. A former Crest Edge colleague forwarded me a screenshot from Halden and Price's website. They'd just announced a new division, Horizon Markets, a specialized initiative focused on underrepresented global segments using culturally adaptive frameworks. The language felt familiar. Du familiar. Nadia, ever the researcher, dug deeper. They'd launched the division within 7 days of the summit. The team structure mirrored ours. The terminology, cultural convergence modeling, context, first expansion, even the phrase invisible growth zones had been pulled straight from our decks, down to punctuation. And the person leading the initiative? Marjorie Latimore. I wasn't surprised. Disappointed? Yes. But not surprised. Still, it might have ended their flattery by imitation if it weren't for what happened next. Jules called me into our meeting room late one afternoon, eyes narrowed behind her laptop screen. They're offering strategy packages to 3 of our current clients, she said. 30% under our rates. I blinked. They're undercutting us? Jules nodded. Aggressively, they're willing to take a loss to win them back. Nadia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. It's not just about business. It's about erasing the narrative that we've earned. They weren't just copying us. They were trying to absorb US rebrand our originality under their name, then push us out of the space we had defined. I sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. We had built Prism on integrity, on empathy, context, and insight. We hadn't taken shortcuts, we hadn't cut corners, we hadn't mimicked what others were doing. And now, the very people who once deemed us too niche, too unscalable, too unconventional, were mimicking every move they could trace. But here's the thing about replicas. They can copy your model. They can echo your words. They can even mimic your pitch. But they can't replicate why you built it in the first place. They don't have your origin story, your scar tissue, your hunger. They don't know what it cost you to sit in the chair you now own. And they certainly don't have the team. I looked across the table at Nadia, Jules, and the growing team behind them, analysts, researchers, translators, economists, each of them hired not because they came from the right schools, but because they saw what others missed. We didn't need to chase Halden and Price. We needed to evolve. I think it's time, I said quietly. Let's finish the framework. Nadia smiled. You mean? Yes, I said. The one they can't steal. The one they'll never see coming. For months, we'd been developing an internal system and assessment model that could identify overlooked talent just like we had been once. It wasn't public. Not yet. But it was ready. If they were playing copycat with the past, then we'd shift the future before they even knew what direction we were facing. And this time, we wouldn't just change the conversation. We'd change the entire game. The framework had lived in the margins of our conversations for months, sketched on napkins, scribbled in notebooks, spoken about late into the night between other deadlines. It had started as a question. What if we could build a better way to see people? Not just resume, not just keywords and alma maters, but actual capability, potential, vision. We called it the Insight Index, an internal system designed to assess talent through scenario-based challenges instead of static credentials. No GPA filters. No Ivy League bias. Just real-world simulations and the kind of intelligence you can't fake on paper. We weren't trying to disrupt HR. We were trying to restore it. And after Halden and Price started knocking on the doors of our clients, undercutting and rebranding our philosophy, we knew it was time to bring the Insight Index into the light. We picked one of our most trusted clients, a forward-thinking tech company whose innovation director had always valued substance over polish. They were expanding rapidly and struggling to hire across 5 global markets. The traditional recruiters they used kept sending the same candidates, high-achieving, well-spoken, perfectly groomed, and nearly identical. Our pitch was simple. Let us show you who you're missing. We ran our assessment on a pilot group of applicants who had already been filtered out by their traditional system. And what we found floored even us. One was a 58-year-old former paramedic from Atlanta who developed a triage inventory system during the pandemic that cut response times by 3–4%. Another was a self-taught coder from Manila who had reverse-engineered a broken logistics app used by rural farmers and redesigned it for free. Not one of them had made it past the initial screening filters. Too old. No formal degree. Not fluent in corporate shorthand. But when they took our scenario-based challenges, they didn't just pass. They soared. When we presented the results to the hiring committee, there was silence at first. Then came the questions. How did we miss them? What else are we filtering out without realizing it? Why isn't this standard? That question echoed for days. Because for so long, the standard had been weaponized against anyone who looked or thought or moved outside the template. We'd felt it ourselves. This was how we fought back. Not with noise. Not with lawsuits. Not even with public outrage. With outcomes. With evidence. With results so undeniable that even the old guard would have to either evolve or vanish. In the weeks that followed, our Insight Index caught fire. Clients who had once hired us for market strategy began asking us to revamp their entire talent pipeline. Venture capital firms requested demos for their portfolio companies. Nonprofits reached out asking if they could adapt the model for equitable leadership development. And Halden Price? They didn't see it coming. Because while they were copying what we'd already done, we were building what came next. This wasn't a revenge campaign. It was a recalibration. A new metric for measuring worth that didn't rely on the gatekeepers who had tried to lock us out. We didn't need their approval. We had something better. Proof. It started with a meeting request. Subject. Exploratory acquisition conversation. Prism strategies. The sender. Darren Holt, Director of Client Development at Halden and Price. The message was polite, corporate, carefully worded. Our executive team has been impressed by Prism's recent growth and would like to initiate a conversation regarding potential partnership or acquisition. We believe there are significant synergies to explore. I stared at the email for a moment, unreadable. Across the table, Nadia looked up from her laptop. They finally blinked. Jules didn't even look surprised. They've been losing clients to us for 6 straight weeks. I'd blink too. I nodded once. Let's hear what they have to say. The meeting was scheduled at their headquarters. 6th floor. Glass walls. Velvet silence. The kind of space designed to make you feel small before you even sit down. But this time I didn't feel small. I wore a charcoal blazer I'd had for years. No flashy labels. No power necklace. Just calm, deliberate presence. With me were Nadia, our Chief Intelligence Officer, and Cameron Lee, our legal counsel. Cameron had the kind of quiet sharpness that made people over-explain themselves. I invited her for a reason. When we entered the conference room, Gerard Walton, CEO of Halden and Price, stood to greet us. Polished. Smooth. Trained in charm. Beside him, arms crossed, was Marjorie Lattimore. Of course. Thank you for making time, Gerard said warmly. We've been following Prism's trajectory with great admiration. We've noticed, I said evenly, settling into my seat. He chuckled as if we were sharing an inside joke. We believe there's potential for something powerful fusion of your innovative edge with our global infrastructure. I tilted my head. And leadership alignment? He gestured toward Marjorie. As Executive VP of Strategy and Integration, Marjorie would oversee the transition. The air stilled. Marjorie didn't flinch. I look forward to facilitating a smooth integration process. I smiled. That's generous. But let's be clear, I'm not here to be absorbed. She blinked, just once. Gerard shifted. Of course. We're open to discussing terms that reflect mutual respect. I reached into my folder and slid a document across the table. Our terms, I said. Not for absorption, for transformation. They began to read. Autonomy for Prism as an independent division. Full ownership of our methodologies. complete authority over hiring and team composition, and the creation of a new internal department, inclusive talent strategy, with executive power and direct board access. Gerard paused. This would override our existing talent systems. I nodded. Yes, it would. Marjorie's voice was quiet, but cold. This would dismantle everything we've spent years refining. No, I replied. It would replace what was never working with something that actually does. She leaned forward, her smile thin. And you would run this new department? I would. The silence was thick enough to stand on. Then Gerard cleared his throat. We'll need to review this with the board. I nodded. Of course. But make no mistake, this isn't a negotiation for permission. It's an offer for evolution. You came to us because your current system is bleeding out. This is the transfusion. Whether you accept it or not, we'll keep growing. As we stood to leave, I caught Marjorie's eye. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind her composed expression. Not disdain, not dismissal, doubt, and maybe just maybe fear. The kind that comes when you realize you're no longer sitting across from a job candidate. You're sitting across from the future. 1 month after that meeting, the acquisition was finalized. Not as a silent surrender, but as a structured revolution. Prism strategies would remain autonomous. Our methodology untouched. Our team intact. Our voice amplified, not absorbed. And our inclusive talent division? Fully funded. Fully independent. Fully mine. It wasn't about ego. It was about protection for every voice that had once been silenced like mine. For every candidate overlooked because they didn't fit the mold. For every woman whose resume had been doubted until a man vouched for her. For every innovator filtered out before they could even enter the room. On my first official day at Halden and Price, I arrived early for the company-wide announcement. The auditorium filled slow rows of polished professionals in tailored suits, curious eyes scanning the stage. I stood beside Gerard near the wings. He looked confident, practiced. But I felt something else rising, not nerves. Conviction. He introduced me with warmth, and applause followed, hesitant at first, then building. I stepped forward, took the mic, and looked out at the sea of professionals. Many had never heard of Prism until the deal. Some still assumed we were a lucky fluke. I smiled. Thank you. I began. I know change makes people uncomfortable, but the truth is, excellence doesn't always look like what we expect. I clicked to the first slide, a data visualization showing client outcomes before and after implementing our strategies. This isn't just growth, I said. It's what happens when you stop measuring people by outdated checklists and start measuring what they can actually do. I showed them case studies. Faces, names. Teams once dismissed now leading market shifts. And then I addressed the elephant in the room. We're not here to diversify for the sake of optics. We're here to raise the standard and finally measure the right things. I ended with a simple line. If potential is invisible to your process, the problem isn't the people, it's the process. The room was quiet. But it wasn't resistance I felt. It was realization. In the weeks that followed, our new framework rolled out across 4 divisions. Hiring managers were trained. Metrics shifted. Resistance surfaced, and slowly, so did results. Within 2 quarters, productivity increased. Turnover dropped. And client satisfaction reached its highest level in company history. But the moment that stayed with me most came nearly a year later. I was working late when there was a soft knock on my door. Marjorie. She stepped in slowly, not as the gatekeeper she once was, but as someone searching for something she'd lost along the way. I reviewed the candidates your team hired last cycle, she said. One of them, Turisol, rejected twice in the past. She's brilliant. I nodded gently. Marjorie paused, then met my eyes. When you pushed for this acquisition, was this always the goal? I thought for a moment. It wasn't about revenge, I said. It was about removing the mechanisms that made us invisible. She swallowed hard. Then, I think you succeeded. She left quietly. No applause. No announcement. Just something unspoken passing between us. Something shifting. That's how revolutions happen, sometimes. Not with noise, but with systems realigned, barriers dismantled, and people finally seen. And if you're still watching, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, don't wait for permission to become who you are. You don't need a seat at their table if you're willing to build your own. And if this story spoke to you, share it. Someone else out there needs to hear it too. Because this wasn't just my story. It was the beginning of something bigger. A quiet revolution. And it's only just begun.